Lisa, it's so great to have you with us. Thank you for joining.
I always enjoy our conversations.
I am really excited because I have degrees in mathematics and computer science, and I'm kind of linear and analytic. I'm going to share an agenda, but most of this is going to be a live conversation with Lisa and I. But I did want to let you know where we're going to be going for the next hour. So first of all, we're going to start with why are we having this webinar? We're going to talk about what is this thing called the last 8% that you would have read about as you were, registering for the webinar. We're going to talk about the importance of last 8% high stakes conversations and share our culture map. And then the whole last section is going to be on strategies you can use to be more effective in those high stage conversations. So that's our agenda. Let me start with the why are we doing this? And the genesis of this webinar came late last year. I delivered two programs in the same week, two workshops in the same week. One was to a group of charities, and one was to a bunch of financial executives at an investment firm. So two completely different groups, and both are about having difficult conversations, and both were the most engaged kind of groups, most intense people bringing practical examples, talking about the things that were challenging, after people thanking us for the work. And I just thought, wow, this stuff really resonates with people. It is a visceral experience to have a difficult conversation with someone. And, I've been doing this work for 25 years and it still makes me anxious. And I have all these skills, yet I still don't always do it perfectly. And so I just thought I want to bring some of this, content and learning, to a broader audience. And then I got talking to Lisa about it, and she said, "Well, that's a pretty cool concept."
I did. And one of the things that struck me, so we all know when you say the last 8%, the part of the conversation that goes unsaid, the part of the conversation you don't get to. And we all know that in these highly charged situations, why we don't do it. What was also interesting to me was I work with a lot of sales teams, with revenue leaders, is there's another reason why people don't get to the last 8%, and it's over eagerness and haste.
Mm.
And so it's not that it's necessarily this highly charged emotional thing. It's yeah, 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 let's move it along, get it done, get it done. And then it doesn't stick. And so that's when you said the last 8%, I told you I have title envy, number one, because that is so
She said
sticky.
she was jealous of the concept.
I was jealous of the concept.
Thank you.
And the reason I was jealous was because I saw that last 8% of the conversation is where the partnership is formed, is where the clarity of mission is formed, is where the tenacity, the commitment is formed. And too often we don't get to it.
Yeah, and I love that when we had that conversation. And I think that that would actually bring us to the first thing I hope people walk away with, which is a mindset shift around these difficult conversations, as opposed to going, oh gosh, I have to do it again. It's actually an opportunity. So these last 8% moments, these tough conversations, they're opportunities to, number one, resolve issues, kind of
Mhm.
clear out some toxicity, but actually it's even more than that. It's actually a way to build connection because when those conversations go well, it builds connection. You become closer.
And what I love about the concept, and I want to jump in and have you explain it since it's your concept, even though I've shared it with a bunch of other people. Um, the thing I love about it is it's distinct and
Mm.
it works so much better than did you have the tough talk? And we've all had that. You and I have coached a lot of senior leaders, and they go, yeah, I did. I told them this and this. And then we go to the person they had the talk with, and they go, didn't come up,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
danced around the edges of it. And so what I love about the last 8% is it become an organizational lexicon and also an internal check. Did I do the last 8%?
Yeah, and in fact, not only that, it actually becomes the norms on the teams we work with. So in our
Yes.
culture system, it actually is, it's a norm. As a team, we have last 8% conversations. We name inconvenient truths. We give
Yeah.
each other difficult feedback. So then when someone steps in to point out a mistake or challenge the status quo, it's not like, wait, where are they coming? Why? It's like, no, no, this is what this team does. So you're absolutely right. It becomes the norm.
The norm. And the thing that I thought about when you were saying, do we challenge each other and do we name inconvenient truths? Is we've all been in that meeting when a bunch of people are saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And maybe because you have access to the customers or the frontline team, or you just have some personal experience, you're like, but people don't really buy those kinds of things anymore. Or, if they did it, it's not going to be different than anything else, but you don't say it.
Right. The meeting after the meeting.
Yeah.
Talk,
And then we all go, I don't think this is going to,
yeah.
and then sure enough, it fails. And we get the satisfaction of being right while the whole thing our company was invested in failed.
Nice. Yeah, yeah, exactly. All right, so let me jump in and just because we've been talking about this last 8%,
Yeah.
let me explain where that came from. Um, and so where it came from was a conversation that our founder, IHHP's founder, Dr. JP Blue Fry, probably going back 7 years now, he was coaching two executives who worked at a large company and they weren't getting along like that ever happens. And so he coached them to have a conversation with each other. And they had the conversation. They come back from the conversation. JP asks how it went. And they both said, yeah, oh, it went fine. And JP asked two questions then that actually kicked off the last 7 years of research and developing this work. The first question is, did you say everything that you wanted to say that we had coached you? And both of them said, well, actually, now that you mention it, I didn't really say everything. And then he asked, what percent did you leave out? And they both said around 5 or 10%. So we took that idea and we did a study of 34,000 people and determined that on average, it's 7.56% that people leave out of a difficult conversation. So we rounded that up to 8%, and that's where we came up with the last 8%.
Mm-hmm. And the thing that's interesting to me is the difficult part is difficult for different people. But when you say that, the last 8%, we all know what we're talking about. One of the things I went to, and you and I discussed this, was performance reviews. And we've all had to give that negative performance review.
Yeah.
And we've seen, and there's hard data that shows this, the leader's perception of delivering the needs improvement versus the recipient's perception is vastly different. And it's in the last 8%.
Absolutely. And what we do is we kind of avoid, we soft pedal, we don't really say the last 8%, but we fool ourselves that we did. The other
Because
person,
I brought it up.
yeah, because I brought it up. The other person thinks we said it, and then we wonder why the behavior doesn't change. And then
Right.
and then we're acting like, well, why aren't you changing? And it's like, well, why is Bill being so passive aggressive? Well, I thought we had this conversation. So yeah, it just creates so much mess afterwards.
Well, and because I brought up the subject, whether the subject was your performance on XYZ, and I'm sure you're all thinking of personal examples for this, we're going to have to do something about mom, or, in a sales or marketing context, potential competition. Because I brought it up, I can tell myself that I did it. But that last 8% is, no, I just brought it up. I didn't have the actual conversation about it.
Well, I got 92% of the way there, and
I
then
mentioned the thing,
yeah,
but I didn't talk about the implications of the thing
right,
or the potential problem with the thing. I said, well, it's going to probably be an issue, maybe kind of, sort of, but let's move on.
right. Yeah. And I think the other reason that people avoid is they don't feel like they have the skills.
Yeah.
So in past conversations, it actually hasn't gone well. That's what happened to me.
Why would I try that again?
Yeah. When I was first a leader, my first few conversations didn't go well. When one of them, the person just stared at me. Well, they were triggered and couldn't hear my feedback. The other one, they start getting defensive. And so I just decided, well, I guess I'm just not good at this. Now, as we workshop this, and we're going to focus today on the conversation part of this, but people said, what, it isn't just last 8% conversations. There's the tough decisions I face. There's the easy ones where everyone's going to agree or I'm not taking a risk. But those tough decisions, and really, whole concept of last 8% is really morphed into being all about risk taking. Because in order to be
Mhm.
high performing, teams need to be able to take risks. And the last 8% is really about that gap between the risk I know I should take and the risk I am actually taking, which again in our research is about 8%. So it's
Yeah.
really kind of fill that gap. So again, we're going to focus on conversations today, but the last 8% is actually much broader than that.
Mhm. And I think it also, we, I want to, as we go through this, and you and I have talked about this, there are those risky ones that feel highly charged, the negative feedback, the I'm the only one in the room that thinks there's a problem with the product,
Hmm.
the we're having to make a decision and we aren't willing to explore what's going to happen if we get it wrong,
Right.
or the downstream implications if we go in this direction.
Sorry, go ahead. You finish.
Well, what I was going to say is there's also another type of risk that I see people, they don't even really realize it's a risk, but it's wading into a place where they're not secure in their knowledge. And
Hmm.
I'll give you an example. You know, we coach a gazillion salespeople, and they're always saying, the leaders are always, I want my team to be partners with our customers. I want them to understand the customer's business. I want them to lean in. But you're asking them to lean in to something they don't really understand that well. And so they're not having that last part of the conversation where they ask good questions. It's like if I was talking to, an astrophysicist and trying to understand them, I'm going to be a little bit uncomfortable because I don't know their world.
Yeah, and I think you make a really good point. And when we talk to people about having last 8% conversations, it isn't that you really ever get to the point where like, oh, this is easy, I can just do this.
Right.
There's always some discomfort, and it's about can you live with that discomfort? Because if you don't lean into that discomfort, that short-term discomfort, then you're going to have long-term regret because you know you should have said something. So it's really, can you withstand that short-term discomfort in order not to have long-term regret?
And so much of this discomfort comes from uncertainty. The human mind hates uncertainty. And if you talk to people about, did you bring it up? Did you explore
Yes.
it? Could you? They'll go, well, I don't know what he's going to say to that. No, you don't.
Yeah. Oh, by the way,
You're going to have to deal with it on the fly.
I can prove to you that it's actually the fear and discomfort, uncertainty. Because if I was to tell someone that, oh, I can guarantee you this conversation is going to go great, the person's going to be thankful for the feedback, and they're going to change the behavior. Would you have any discomfort? Oh no, I can have that conversation. So it truly is the unknown and the uncertainty of how the other person's going to react.
Right, right. Because, and the thing is, it's the more, and we're going to get into strategies, the more times you do it, the more confidence you have. I don't know, but
Hmm.
it's most likely I'll be able to manage it.
Absolutely. By the way, we are checking both the chat and the Q&A, and someone actually put a question in the Q&A, which is, what does IHHP stand for? Which is the company that I am with, and it's Institute for Health and Human Potential. And it is a bit of a mouthful, so we do shorten it to IHHP. So feel free to put questions either in the chat or the Q&A.
I think the
Okay.
Q&A is working.
Yes, the Q and the chat is now working as well.
Okay, great.
All right. So I want to talk a little bit about why these last 8% conversations matter so much. And there's two things I want to share. One is, and at IHHP, we love a little bit of brain science. It's the cortisol effect. And the cortisol effect is that when there is tension, when there is pressure, when there's conflict or uncertainty, cortisol gets released, which causes memories to sear in. So people will remember how you showed up in those last 8% moments. They don't remember what you're doing in the 92% of moments when everything was going well, and the deadlines were being met, and everyone was getting along. So the cortisol steers in memory. This then becomes your reputation because that's what everyone remembers. That then becomes what people model, which becomes the culture. So culture is not formed when things are going well. Culture is formed in the difficult moments. So is your leadership and what people will remember about you.
Mhm. And if you think back to your personal life, and that's where it's always easier to look at the patterns, And you think you probably have long periods of your life that you're like, what happened there? I don't know. Probably because there weren't any of these high impact emotional moments.
Yeah.
But think about the moment when you found out you were getting a promotion, or
Mhm.
you found out you were getting passed over, or your company told you they were going public and it was going to mean amazing things, or your company told you they were being bought and it was going to mean really bad things. Like you remember, and I purposely went back and forth between the positive and the negative, that the cortisol sears it, jumps in, sears in the memory, and you remember it
Yeah.
forever because it
Absolutely.
was such a high emotion moment.
That's why you can do something right 9 times out of 10, but that one time you did it wrong, that's what she remembers. I mean, that's what they remember.
Well, and it's, I see what you did there. It, we also is a reason that we over index on our own mistakes because we're flooded with emotion and shame. And so if you've ever been in a relationship where you think someone criticizes you a lot, they very likely might, you might have an overly critical boss. Or if you wrote down the talk track, it might be the one time out of 10, and that's the one you remember. It might not be that's the only thing they remember. It might be that's the only thing you remember.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, so the other thing I want to share with respect to the conversations is everyone has a predictable default behavior when faced with a last 8% situation. And in our research, a different research study, 68% of people, their default behavior is to avoid. Either
Yeah.
avoid the conversation completely or avoid that last 8%. Now, the other 32%, what are they, where do they fit? I sometimes fall into this category. If I'm in a difficult conversation and the other person starts reacting and getting defensive, instead of holding back and avoiding, I now step in and start fighting back, and now I'm making a mess. So we talk about people being either avoiders or make a messers.
Yeah. It said the make a messer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, Lisa, what about you? Are you more of an avoider or make a messer?
I'm a make a messer.
Yeah.
At times it depends on the situation, like all of us. And I would be curious now that the chat's working. I would like to know from people. I see we've got somebody from San Antonio, Maryland, Washington, D.C., Illinois. Tell me what your job function is.
Hmm.
That's what I'd be really curious to know. I've used a couple of examples here for customer facing teams because that's the area that I work in.
Hmm.
And what I find in customer facing teams, be they sales leaders, customer service, they're the avoiders. And
Hmm.
they're the avoiders because having it go badly with the customer feels high stakes. Having the customer even the slightest bit annoyed with you feels high stakes. And so what happens is, we talk about quiet quitting, people just sort of go away.
Yeah.
Customers do that too, and you don't
Yeah.
even know it. And so
Yeah.
what happens is it's high stakes. The people avoid it. I think that customer didn't quite get what they wanted. Oh, they might not be so happy with us. And so then they avoid it and they wind up, the customer just walks away.
Yeah, yeah. By the way, I love that question. We have people from all sorts of different job functions.
Yeah.
I loved Enrico, who said he's an engineer lead. And by the way, hi, Enrico. I know Enrico. He's customer facing, and he also admitted he's a make a messer. So
Yeah.
thanks, Enrico. And somebody else said, either way, you're making a mess. And that is true. Neither is worse than the other.
Yeah.
When you're avoiding, then you're not dealing with issues. By the way, then there's some residue or toxicity. It's not, but if you're making a mess, then you're dealing with the outcome of making a mess. And Lisa, you mentioned something that is true, which is although we all have a predictable default behavior, it really is situational. There might
Yeah.
be situations with a senior boss where you might be more likely to avoid, but with my teenage daughters, when they're yelling, I'm more likely to yell back, which, by the way, the
Yeah.
only thing I'm doing when I yell at my daughter to stop yelling is teaching her to yell, right? And then that becomes, because of the cortisol effect, that
And
becomes what she remembers.
yeah. And then everyone's ratcheted up and then no one even remembers what they started. And I come from a family of make a messers. I married into a family of avoiders.
Ah,
And so it's very easy for me, who will jump in and make a mess, to see the avoiders when you punt the conflict,
Mm,
It never gets smaller.
mm.
It never gets smaller. The tough discussion that you don't want to have today is not going to be easier next week. The stakes get higher, it's worse and worse. And so, what I see is conflict avoiders are always in conflict because they never deal with it when it's low stakes. They
Mm.
only get to it when it's high stakes and you can't punt it anymore.
Yeah. The other reason these are so important because you mentioned earlier, and this is so true. When I ask people, what are the types of difficult conversations they need to have, anyone who's a leader, performance reviews are always,
Oh,
part of
yeah.
that. And the thing is, if you're not giving the person a performance feedback, not only are you doing them a disservice by not giving them the feedback, but you're actually demotivating the rest of the team by not giving, by
Oh, and
allowing
there's
underperformers to.
tons of work on that. As we get into strategies, I don't want to steal the thunder, but clarity of goals and clarity of purpose strengthens the last 8% muscle
Yeah.
because we know that this matters.
We will definitely get to the
Yeah.
strategies, but since you brought it up, tell me more about that.
Well, if the stakes are high, the shared stakes are high. That gives you courage.
Hmm.
If it's just about me and I gotta have this performance review discussion, I'm gonna hedge, I'm gonna go around, da da da. But if the stakes are high, like people are gonna be on our plane and we have to have the safety right, that gives people the courage. And we see that in a lot of different situations.
Yeah. I mean, I've always said in order for someone to do something different to change their behavior, like step into a difficult conversation, the pain of not changing has to weigh the pain of changing.
Right,
Right? So there
right.
has to be a motivator.
And that's a leadership moment.
Thanks. I'm going to share one more thing and then we'll get to the strategies.
Mhm.
Because I wanted to talk about how this impacts culture and why,
Yeah.
these mastering difficult conversations are so important. Again, in our research, research studies 72,000 people, as well as some work done at Stanford and some other places, we've identified that there's two pillars of a high performance culture. One is connection and psychological safety, right? That's the engagement. That's the people feeling valued, having a voice, feeling cared about, and that is critical. However, in so many organizations we work with that are trying to improve leadership or develop culture, they forget the second pillar, which is high courage. That is
Yeah.
the ability to skillfully do hard things. And so there's avoid, there's make a mess. There is a third way, which is to step in skillfully.
Yeah.
So we took these two concepts, we created a culture map, and Lisa, you've seen this, so I'm gonna present it, and then I want your thoughts on it. So we took those two pillars, and on the left axis is courage, and on the bottom axis is connection. So in the upper left, where it's high courage and low connection, that's more of a transactional culture, right? That's more where results matter over relationship. The conversations are happening, but it's more blaming, it's more making a mess. You have to endure toxic bad apples because they get results. People are afraid to speak up because their ideas are going to get shot down, and it's high anxiety and high burnout. It can get results over the short term, but it's not sustainable over the long term. All right. The bottom right, and we see this more often, is low courage but high connection. That's a family culture. That's a nice culture, but people are unwilling to do hard things for the reasons we've talked about. It's more of an avoidance culture. It's a nice culture. There's less accountability. Decision making is slower because you have to get everybody involved and everybody has to be happy. There's nothing wrong with consensus decision making, but taken too far, it slows things down. So the difficult conversations are not happening. And there's lots of positive things about a family culture because it's high care, but it's not enough to be high performing. And this is where those difficult conversations come in. In order to move up into the upper right hand quadrant, you have to have people taking risks. We don't see as much of the bottom left. That's the old command and control, low risk taking, inconsistent behavior, and lots of bad apples. The North Star, the aspiration, and why you want to create a culture that norms having difficult conversations. A last 8% culture is characterized by high accountability and high care. So there's high trust and smart risk taking. It's a feedback rich environment. And I always say to leaders, it's not just the leader giving feedback to the employee, but the team start to give feedback to each other, which means as a leader, you don't have to do it. So that's great. Lots of that balance of results and relationships, not one or the other. and then high experimentation, high innovation, because people do feel safe. It's okay to take risks. It's okay to make a mistake. All right, Lisa, give me your thoughts on this.
So I want to give an example as you think about this. And it's interesting because the family, it's a nice culture, but they don't get things done. So I'll give you an example. We just did a major project with Hilton, the large
Mm,
hotel chain all around the world. They've got everything from the Conrad, these fancy hotels, to, the Hampton Inn on the side of the interstate. And one of the things that you look at, if you look at a last 8% culture, when you talk about high care and high accountability,
mhm,
very difficult to create that if you don't have a clear, true north.
mm,
If your true north in the organization is money, you'll get a transactional culture.
yeah.
You can run a decent business, it is unlikely that you will be a differentiated business,
Mhm,
that you will be a business that customers choose for any reason other than price
yeah.
or some feature. And so we did this project with Hilton, and they have this clarity of purpose. Conrad Hilton said 100 years ago, our purpose is to fill the earth with the light and warmth of hospitality.
Mm,
And so if you look at that phrase, fill the earth with the light and warmth of hospitality, I mean, you could put it on a t-shirt, you could put it on a greeting card, or you could turn it into action. And so everyone cares very deeply about that guest experience, and
mhm,
everyone holds everyone else accountable for that. And
yeah.
so to your point of high care, high accountability, to what? To high care about what? And that's the thing that why this concept was so intriguing to me, and I wanted to, spend some time with you on it,
Mhm,
is the family culture. The true north is liking each other. The
yes.
fear-based culture, the true north is probably someone's power and
Someone's
control.
power. Exactly.
The transactional culture, the true north is usually money.
Yeah.
The last 8% culture, you have to have a true north, and it can't just be about you. And so
Mm,
if it's your noble purpose, if it's your customer impact, if it's putting a dent in the universe, it's the advancement of science, whatever that may be, if you and Amy Edmondson just did a piece in Harvard Business Review about the mistakes that people make on psychological safety. And one of the antidotes
mhm,
to psychological safety means we all like each other. No. We all say nice things. No. It's we speak the inconvenient truths. And the way to get people to do that is keep restating the larger goal and what's at
yeah.
stake.
I love that. That's why I love your work on purpose. Because
Yeah.
you're right. In order to get people to push through that discomfort that we're talking about, that we're needing people to do, if it's only because I need to help this company make money, they're way less likely to push through the discomfort. But if it's for a purpose that really, connects to one of our clients who's doing really amazing work is Tenneco Automotive. And you can
Oh, yeah.
talk about being in an industry right now that's dealing with a ton of change and uncertainty. They have what's called their Tenneco Way. And
Mm.
more than any company I've ever worked with, and I've been doing this for 24 years, they are invested right from the CEO, Jim Voss, right down all the way, down to the plant in showing up, and radical candor is one of the values of the
Yeah.
Tenneco Way. But it's not, here's the other thing about the last 8%. It's not a license to be mean or bully. The idea is yes, you want to have radical candor, and you have to do it skillfully. So that's part of the kind of the tools and the skills we're going to get to. The last thing I want to say about this is culture doesn't necessarily exist across an organization. It exists on teams. You
Yes.
can have an organization, and we hear this all the time, where it's like, well, sales is more transactional, marketing is a family culture, engineering is fear-based, so there can be all different cultures. And part of the goal of the culture work that we do is to have a more consistent culture that's in the upper right-hand quadrant. One
Well,
final,
if you
but go
Well,
ahead.
what you were just going to say, I deal with tons of sales teams, and they have a reputation for being transactional, and it's because the only true north is money.
Right.
So why are you surprised that that's yeah, but when the last 8% culture, if you're spreading this across the organization, back to be candor, if we care deeply and I find out that you left the meeting and you had concerns and you didn't share them with me, and we've established that we care deeply, we have a last 8% culture, we have this shared purpose, then I'm going to come back to you and go, hey, Bill, what's going on? Why didn't you bring it up? Because I thought that's what we
Yeah.
did here. Not because you're a nice guy, I'm a nice guy, not because of this or that, but because the stakes are high here.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and by the way, the other piece of it is if someone, does give feedback in a harsh or bullying way, to actually be able to give them the feedback. Hey, I really value the feedback. Here was my experience of it. How can we do that in a better way? And so, yeah, it's
Yeah.
all about that feedback loop. Just one final, little bit of data, because we love data at IHHP. In our research, 18% of teams are in transactional. Only 12% are fear-based, so that's the good news. 37%, so the largest number are in family, and only 33% are in a last 8% culture. And in our culture assessment, because we can assess an organization, a team, the ones that are in the last 8% typically are kind of just over the line. They're not all the way up in the upper right. So even the ones that are in of the 33%, the number that are so this is hard to do. This is not easy to be a last 8% culture, to be a last 8% leader. So I just really want to acknowledge that what we're talking about is not easy.
Yeah, and I love the naming of it takes it out of the personal and enables you to say, this is a skill, like giving a keynote. You and I both give keynotes. It's a skill, and I want to be really, really good at it. So I'm always working on it. And I don't view it as a, character failing that I have work to do on this because it's really hard and you got to really work at it to be good at it. And you have to make it look easy while you're working at it. That's a separate thing.
It is. And so you just kind of, set up perfectly kind of, the next segment of this, which is assuming, you want to, and by the way, you can contribute to your team being a last 8% culture, whether you are a leader or
That's
not.
right.
So everybody on the team can contribute to it being a last 8% culture. So we're assuming right now that you all have a desire and interest and aspiration in stepping into those last 8% moments skillfully. So we're going to walk you through. There's an article that we're going to share with you afterwards where I kind of laid out 6 steps to having a difficult conversation, and they're not the only 6 steps, not the only way to explain them, but it's kind of like me when I have to have one. It's kind of what I go through, and it starts with ourselves. It's that airplane analogy. Before you put the oxygen mask on someone else, you've got to put the oxygen mask on you. Because if you are even a little bit triggered emotionally and you walk into that conversation, they will sense it. People have mirror neurons. And so you have to start by managing your own emotions.
Yeah. And the thing about that is when you talk about managing your own emotions, if it's a challenging conversation, you've attached a lot of anxiety to it.
Yes.
You're bringing the anxiety to this, not them. And one of the things that we often coach salespeople on is we do this thing we call the 10-second game changer,
Mm.
which is you take a breath first, then you say, I am here to help this customer, whatever, improve their finances, enjoy their stay, whatever it may be. And I'm okay with however it goes.
Mm.
Because you've got to have a true north and you also have to make peace with the uncertainty.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. So we actually call it the SOS strategy. I know you've seen that. And by the way, we originally developed that with the US Navy over 26 years ago. So we intentionally use the SOS metaphor because it's the Navy. By the way, the Navy have a great quote about last 8% moments, and it is ships are safe in the harbor, but that's not what ships are for.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, we're not going to be our best if we stay within our comfort zone, right? We only get better when we move outside our comfort zone. And so the SOS is stop. So as you
Yeah.
said, disconnect, take a break, clear your
Yeah.
mind. O is oxygenate. So that intake of the oxygen, right? It interacts with the chemicals that our emotional system has released. And the third part, S, is seek information.
Yeah.
And the seeking information is just what you talked about. It's also that mindset shift. So seek information in terms of how do I want to view this? Is this a terrible thing and that I have to do that I think is going to go badly? Or is this an opportunity for me to improve the relationship, improve the outcome, solve a problem? So, kind of the other piece is that we do tend to awfulize. We tend to think it's going to be worse than it is. And so, am I amplifying the negative, right? Am I assuming all the negative outcomes? Okay, what about assuming a positive outcome? Because that helps calm our brain down if we also look at the potential for a positive outcome.
Well, I'm looking at the chat and Mary has put something really great here.
Mm,
Detach from the outcome
yes.
and be open, because you don't even have to be positive to have these conversations go well. You should be neutral. You know, I mean, if your boss, I mean, imagine the difference if you're on the receiving end of a conversation with the boss that says, well, I got something. I know we've done the performance review. There's one thing we got to talk about, and it's your research. And I just don't think that like the boss is attaching all this anxiety to it when it may be 8% of your performance review, to use your number.
Yeah.
The boss just said, I don't know how this person is going to receive it. I
Right.
don't know if they're going to go off the deep end or they're going to go, hey, no problem. I didn't know that. I'll change.
Yeah.
I literally don't know.
Yeah. Awesome. So the first strategy is to manage ourselves,
Yeah.
take that deep breath, and really check our thinking for accuracy, because so often we're assuming, the
Yeah.
worst. Okay, the second part then is to really think through, and this is your purpose, Lisa. It's what's the purpose for the conversation, and how can I state it in a way where I'm clarifying a positive intention?
Yeah.
Because again, the way the brain works, if I walk into a meeting and I don't clarify my intention, I start giving somebody feedback, their defenses are up there. I'm in trouble. They're mad at me. I didn't do my job. I'm not going to get like. So if you can clarify and say, hey, I really believe you can be a top performer. And so I'm giving you this feedback to help you get there. That makes hearing
That
performance feedback way easier.
Well, Enrico brings up an interesting point. He says many of the last 8% conversations are about making a difference and moving forward, so the outcome is important. There's a nuance there. If you look at the chat, you'll see Mary's
Yeah.
comment attached and Enrico's comment that the outcome is important. So if
Yeah.
you look at your example, if that person is not doing an important part of the job well, yeah, I need to get them to do it well.
Mhm.
That's my true north in this conversation. I want you to be a great performer. What I want to detach from is all the anxiety that I have about how they're going to respond and how
Yes.
this conversation is going to exactly go. So if we say, to your point, I do my breathing and all of that, and I say the intent of this conversation is for you to be a top performer. We're both committed to that. And right now, we have an issue. That's true north, but I'm not going, the intent is to be a top performer. And I know you're probably not going to want to hear this and you're going to react badly. And like,
Yeah.
mm,
I think there's the outcome that the business needs, that the behavior change is going to have.
right.
It's the outcome of the conversation. And I think the advice that I think, and I'm sorry, I've forgotten who gave the advice, is let go of the outcome of needing the conversation to go in a certain way
You
or have
didn't
a
need
certain
to apply
outcome.
in a certain way. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So Enrico's referring to the business outcome, which we don't want to let go of. It's actually the outcome of the conversation. And because what happens is we're in the conversation, it's not going the way we want to, then we start getting anxious.
Yes.
That's
Becca says detach from the response reaction and focus on the outcome. That's exactly right. It's we have a question that we use in sales coaching, and it is a very simple question. How will the customer be different as a result of doing business with us? Because
mm,
all bejungled up and, well, we want to do this, we want to do that, we want to do this. And what we want to do is lift people's eyes to the larger impact, get agreement on that, and then the conversation isn't, in some ways, is more important because we have clarity on the larger impact, but the way we handle it becomes less important. You said, she said, he said, this, that, because we have clarity. If you've ever been annoyed at your spouse and then suddenly have a big problem with one of your children, man, you two will align like that
right. Yeah.
because the outcome is so important.
Yeah. No, that's true. Okay, so the first two parts of the six-part strategy are the SOS manage yourself, clarify, write it down beforehand, clarify, and start with a positive intention.
Yeah.
Okay, the other thing that tends to happen, and the third strategy we say is start on their side of the bridge. So if you think of you're in a conversation, there's a gap, there's your side of the bridge, there's their side of the bridge, their behavior. Most people, when they go, and I used to do this, when they go into a difficult conversation, they start from their side of the bridge. Well, I need you to do this, and you've done this, and this has happened, and you're making statements, and that puts the other person on the defensive. What we're
Yeah.
suggesting is that you actually think through, gosh, what's on their side of the bridge? What might be going on for them? Why might they be behaving this way? What might be getting in their way? Not because you're going to excuse it, not because you're going to give in, not because you're going to be wrong, but because if you start on the other side of the bridge, and that involves acknowledging them, listening, asking questions, you might learn information you didn't know, because that how many times has that happened to us? Oh, I can't believe that, and then you find something you're like, oh, gee, sorry. So number one, you might find, but even if you ultimately are going to give them the feedback, if they've shared first, they feel heard, and then you can, and so they're much more likely to be open to your feedback. So you start
Yeah.
on the other person's side of the bridge by asking questions.
And the thing that I think is interesting here is I taught for a solid decade negotiation skills and
Mm,
did a number of different programs, one of which was the very famous Getting to Yes program. And what's interesting is we're talking about last 8% conversations you might have in an organization. But when it comes to negotiation skills, the master negotiators start on their side of the bridge.
yeah,
And I know what my side of the bridge looks like. I already know that. I don't need to start there. That's coming in one way or the other.
it's going to come in.
But what I don't know is their side. And it's actually a power move. And I don't mean a power move like a power over, but a power with,
Mhm.
because that starts on the side that they know the best, that they're the most comfortable with, that once they feel heard, they can listen to you. And that's why I say it's a power move. People, when we used to teach negotiation skills, people will go, but I need this, but I need this. And I just felt like saying, like, calm down, Sparky.
Right.
You don't need it in the first 2 minutes of the conversation. Get get the lay of the land, the context, the what's happening, the what's they're trying to achieve. And if you all are diametrically opposed, you'll find out. Or
Mhm.
if in fact you're 90% aligned, you'll find out.
Mhm.
But it's like jumping off a cliff without like at least doing a cursory scan, like in the
Yeah.
movie when the people are chasing someone and they have no choice but to jump off the cliff, they still look first.
Yeah, and what happens, we're up at night, we're thinking about it, we're stressing about it, we're writing, making our notes, and we get into the meeting, it's like, oh, I gotta get it out. And so just really with your SOS, calm down, and by the way, have questions prepared. So
Right.
don't forget, you actually go in, state your positive intention, and have a couple questions prepared. So that's the third part of the strategy. Do you want
Is
to add
on
something
their
before I move
side.
on?
And the thing when you're talking about staying up at night rehearsing it, I see y'all out there. I know a bunch of people, and I know I'm not the only one that's done this. You have rehearsed what you wanted to say in the shower, and you were so good in that shower that they were awestruck by your logic.
Yeah.
They fell and they went, "Oh, I see the error of my ways. I'm doing it now." It No one is going to be as agreeable and pliable as your shower nozzle. Okay, you got to like get over that.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, the fourth part, and again, this isn't kind of the order you do things in, but as you're preparing, so this is really as you prepare, is to actually be really clear about what's the last 8% that I need to say before the meeting's over.
Right.
Because if you end up in a situation where it's not going perfectly and they're getting a little defensive or they're bringing things up, and that is when we tend to step back. So you walk in really clear. No, I need to say this. They're not going to leave this meeting until they have heard my feedback. So you want to be really clear about what that feedback is that you need to say before you leave the meeting.
And I would say, as I look at this and I'm drawing parallels to all kinds of customer conversations, one of the things that I would add to that on defining it, what do I need to know?
Mm.
Because what I see is a lot of
Yeah.
times salespeople usually say plenty in their interactions.
Mhm.
They don't ask enough and they don't know enough. And
Right.
so, what do I need to know? Which often is stepping into these waters of uncertainty. But the truism of what you're saying here, defining it before you go in.
Yeah.
There's a reason why that shower speech is so good because you ruminated on it all night
Yep.
and were prepared to give it so well in the shower. And so if you start on their side of the bridge and you've gotten clear on where we need to get, we can often cannot plan for a last 8%.
Enrico's got a great point. In
Enrico's
fact,
right.
we
Let's
ask
go to
people, and there's two kinds of last 8% conversations. There's the expected ones that you can plan for, and there are the unexpected ones that suddenly, your day is going fine and
There
you're
it
in
is.
the and in fact, we did a survey, and it's 58% people feel are unexpected. So you're right, Enrico, it is more. But all these skills that you use as you practice and prepare for an expected one, you'll have easier access because you really want to do this in an unexpected. You want to manage yourself so you don't get defensive and you can hear. You want to, get to their side of the bridge. You want to do all of these things. We talk about be curious and speak up. So those
Yes.
are two skills that in their culture work that we really want to leave people with is start by being curious and don't leave the meeting without speaking up. So in an unexpected moment, if you can just think, be curious, speak up, that will be a huge opportunity for you. Okay.
Well, can I interject? Because I want to say something about Enrico's comment
Mhm.
and why you and I met and first started talking about this. I mean, maybe it was like 8 weeks ago or so, maybe a little more. One of the things I did after we had this conversation and I had this last 8% lexicon, I was in a family situation with someone in my family that was ill and it went on for several weeks, which if you've been in that, there's lots of difficult conversations. Who's going to take care? Who's going to pay? Who's going to blah, 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 blah. And to Enrico, to the point of sometimes these conversations just pop up. That happened a bunch. What helped me was I thought, what's the last 8% of this conversation that we need to have? And just that shortcut of thinking, just having that lexicon, having had it defined, I was in the moment, the stakes were high, I hadn't prepared, but just being able to say, okay, what's the last 8% everybody's dancing around? Can I speak the inconvenient truth in a calm way? It made a huge difference. Made a huge
Well,
difference.
good. I'm glad. That's why we do this work to make a difference for people, and it makes a difference for us, which is the best part of it. Okay, the last two parts of kind of the 6-part strategy is in for an expected conversation. If you aren't, if you're a little uncomfortable with your approach, you're not sure what you might get right into, find a trusted advisor. Someone who ideally knows you, but someone you can actually walk through and go, I have to have this conversation.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm thinking. Here's my approach, and get some feedback, right? And any we're two of us are better than in any one of us together, and so get feedback, get coaching.
Yeah. And it's oftentimes there's a shame if you have to go have a difficult conversation. It's oftentimes, again, I deal with a lot of customer facing teams. You've messed up
Mm,
or something you did messed up. And so there's an embarrassment. And
yeah.
so I don't go get coaching beforehand because I just want to minimize it. I just want it to go away.
Mhm.
I don't want everyone to know about this. I'm going to handle this on my own. And you know, people know their organizations. It may or may not be best to go to your leader, but I notice you say a trusted advisor.
Correct.
Go to someone, say,
Be outside the organization. Could be your spouse or partner or a friend or yeah.
I'm in a pickle. What, like, can we practice? If you have ever had, as an executive coach, I often do practice conversations with people, and they're all like, oh God, do we have to practice this? And every time they do, we practice it going a couple different ways. Every time they do, they come back and go, oh, I'm so glad we practiced that.
Absolutely. The last part, so the sixth part of the strategy is a lot of people assume when we say, "Oh, master last 8% conversations," that it's all going to go well in one conversation and then we're done, right?
This
Oh,
will all be
so
good.
often it's multiple conversations. It leaves. It was a little tense. You come back, people go and think about it. So have a follow-up plan. whether it's, I mean, especially if you're giving a performance feedback, but even if it's just feedback to a peer, pointing out whatever it is, um, plan to have a follow-up. Hey, let's reconnect on this next week. Let's reconnect tomorrow. Whatever it is, it typically doesn't resolve itself fully in one conversation. So that's the last part, is have a follow-up plan.
Yeah. And it gives them time to think when they're away from you.
Yes.
Because they maybe are having to manage their anger, shame, disappointment, whatever, and it's taking everything they've got
Mm.
to manage that. You've been thinking about it for weeks in advance. They might not have, or you've been at least thinking about it on your walk over there and when you're firing up your Zoom. And I think that also eases it on their end because they know, okay, we are going to talk. I can collect my thoughts.
Yeah, yeah, great.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the kind of the 6 point strategies, and we've got a little time for Q&A. And the last question that was answered, I do want to clarify, Ben. Thank you so much for asking. Yes, the what you're holding back, the what you're not saying in a conversation, that's the last 8%, and that was from our research,
Yeah.
where people, said basically on average it's 7.56, but 8% that they feel they leave unsaid, in a difficult conversation.
Yeah.
Adrian, are there any other questions that you saw, because I haven't seen all the questions that you feel like would be good ones? And Lisa, go ahead and do that follow up, and then we'll ask
Yeah.
Adrian.
What I was going to say was the emphasis on this is on difficult conversations and the things that we're hedging on, that we're not bringing up. And I brought up the point earlier, and I want to reiterate it here, that oftentimes in customer facing teams, in sales teams, account management, we deal with a lot of chief commercial officers and they lead these big teams. The last 8% in the conversation with the customer isn't always tense or anxious, it's
Hmm.
uncertain. And what happens is, I'll give you a really quick example. Customer says, yeah, we have a problem with our accounting software. The salesperson, instead of saying, what are the implications of that? What's the downstream impact? They go, you're having a problem? I got a new one. Let's go. And so they don't get to the last part of the conversation because they're so eager to get what they want. They're not on their side of the bridge. They're so eager to get what they want. They pitch, they may get it, they may not. But if they'd have just taken a breath, and I've been using your 8% metaphor or lingo, and I've said, okay, they told you this. What's the last part that you can explore? The need's still going to be there, two questions later. But I
Hmm.
see that sometimes it's not anxiety, it's just haste.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great. By the way, Kimberly, so glad you're enjoying the presentation. Yes, you will be getting a replay of the presentation, along with a few other follow-up resources. All right, Adrian, we got a couple minutes for a question or two before we close. What do you got?
Lots of good questions, lots of great engagement. Thank you, everyone, for that. One of the good questions that came in was, what do I do when I feel like I've already given the person feedback and they're not changing their behavior?
Mm.
Yeah. That we can both take it.
You go
It's
ahead.
that's where you need to go back to questions. And you may think you've had a last 8% conversation, but if they heard it, and instead of, before you go back and say, hey, we covered this, you're not changing, go back and say, I brought up this. What was your take on that?
Yeah, can we talk about, absolutely. So asking more questions. The
Because
end
it
is
has not.
there can sometimes be a point where you literally have done your best. You've done everything you can do, and the other person is not willing to come to your side. They're not willing to change their behavior. Then it more becomes about, how do you manage that? How do you manage it so it doesn't impact you? How do you put some boundaries in place?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, we don't want to keep banging our head against something that it just isn't going to get better. And so that is a common conversation. But in my experience, because as you do, Lisa, I coach people. 90% of the time, they haven't really done their best. They haven't really done everything that can be done. So it really is just 10% where it's like, okay, you know what? I got to come up with a new way of dealing with this.
Well, and the other thing is, when we focus on a behavior change, we want to be clear and specific. we also want to show the implications of
Mhm.
the behavior and the effect. I do want to show one slide, if is it
Oh, absolutely. Yep.
that I hadn't shown. And this is connected to the last 8%. This is from a piece that we did for Harvard Business Review. But it is the connection that I want to make is how the leader language produces financial results.
Mm.
And a lot of times leader language is just, we got to hit these targets, we got to hit these numbers, we got to do this, we got to do that. And the last 8% of that conversation is missing. And the last 8% of we got to hit these numbers are more qualitative things. Here's how we improve life for customers. Here's what we're doing. And the reason I'm connecting it to the last 8% is there's a simple thing that you can do when your team is talking about customers, and
Mhm.
that's to just say, what impact do we have on them? Because I
Mhm.
think one of the things that you're talking about with this, and you can see that piece, maybe somebody on my team will put a link to it in the chat. But I think the thing that really struck me and why I was so enamored of your concept was it's taking a lot of things that we think are implicit and being explicit about them.
I love that chart. And by the way, congratulations on the Harvard Business Review. I'm excited to say that we have an article coming out in the next few months on the last 8% and the
Oh,
culture.
that's
So
awesome.
yeah, we're very excited. Okay, so I'm gonna close off. First question, Lisa, if people want to get a hold of you, how do they find you?
I'm easy to find on LinkedIn.
Okay,
You can find me on LinkedIn, Lisa Earle McLeod. If you Google Noble Purpose, you'll find me.
awesome. All right, and I'm Bill Benjamin. I'm also on LinkedIn. My company, the Institute for Health and Human Potential, is on LinkedIn. Oh yeah, there, Elizabeth put yours in for you. And so I just want to say, Lisa, thank you so much. This was so much fun. We actually, when we were sitting first talking about it, we were like going on riffing off each other for 15 minutes. And I'm like, we just had the webinar. That's all the webinar
Right.
is you and I kind of riffing. So thank you very much for joining me. Thank you to everyone for being here. And Adrian, I'll turn it over to you to close.